I just want to make sure you're doing all right. We care about you.
Did you remember to get my comedy mask?
Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. Welcome back to my Character Spotlight series for the amazing digital circus. Today we'll be talking about Kinger, and it's going to be a little different from my previous videos. Most of the characters in the amazing digital circus have character arcs. Even if you think the arc didn't come across very well or needed some extra time in the oven, I think it's fair to say that there was the intention of growth for every character. Everyone is meant to start the series one way and end it having learned something about themselves or the world around them. Everyone except Kinger. Kinger doesn't really learn anything throughout the series. He starts out seemingly crazy, but over time it's revealed that there are hidden depths of wisdom to him. And watching that happen is intriguing and emotionally rewarding. But that isn't the same as character development. Kinger is not being intentionally oblivious in his day-to-day life. His memory loss and erratic behavior are established as something that he can't really control. This isn't framed as something he needs to personally overcome, it's framed as him being a fully realized and mature character who has a somewhat ambiguous and inconsistent off switch. This is interesting for its own reasons, but it means that his purpose in the narrative is much more structural than the others. How Kinger feels about certain events is acknowledged, but it's generally considered less important than how his presence can affect other characters and what they're learning. This doesn't mean that he's a shallow or bad character, it just means that his role within the story is different than the other characters. He's wise in a lot of ways, but only when the narrative allows him to be. And I find that very fascinating. I enjoy Kinger as a character, but for very different reasons than I enjoy other characters. And that's something that I'd very much like to explore with you all today. We're going to take a look at Kinger and his role throughout the series, both as the supportive adult who helps the circus members cope, and the kooky old one who knows more than he lets on. And I hope that you'll enjoy coming on this journey with me. If you're enjoying this character analysis series, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And feel free to check out the playlist for all the videos I've done so far, and for my other amazing digital circus stuff. And please, feel free to send this to anyone and everyone you know, regardless of how you end up feeling about it. With all of that said, I think it's time we get started. Grab some water, a heaping helping of mashed potatoes, and get comfortable. Let's talk about Kinger. I mentioned in my Gangle video that in this first theme song adventure thing, the characters are all making a choice about how they want to be perceived. They're presenting themselves in a specific way for a theoretical audience. And Kinger kind of doesn't do that. Throughout the first episode, he's portrayed as someone erratic and random, who kind of has to be led to everything in order to really participate. And this characterization remains relatively consistent throughout the first few episodes. He's not dangerous per se, but he is something unpredictable in an environment that is already really weird to the people forced to live in it. He'll hop from subject to subject, seemingly at complete random, and he often forgets who he's talking to or what he's doing unless someone is directly speaking to him. And as someone with ADHD whose medicine is currently in a moving box somewhere, I can relate. But like many of the characters in this series, this first impression isn't accurate upon further examination. Kinger is nowhere near as unaware and off in space as he seems, and this is actually subtly established in the first few episodes. He might not know where he is a lot of the time, but he shows that he has some understanding of how the world is supposed to work. And for the purposes of this section, his kindness and care for others is established extremely early on as well. Even though he doesn't do a very good job of it, he's happy to be the one who gets to save Zooble. and his first instinct when Gangle's mask is stolen is to go and retrieve it. Even though he drags Pomni along with him unintentionally, this was a spur-of-the-moment decision motivated by kindness. And it's moments like these that do a really good job of establishing the core of Kinger's character. They don't come across as strange because they're played as jokes, but in retrospect, they show us that he's someone who cares very much about the people around him. And the series doesn't make us wait very long to dig into this behavior, with episode 3 showing us in full what Kinger is like when he's in darkness. He doesn't really change too much as a person, but he gains some self-awareness and becomes an incredibly stable and insightful presence in what is a very scary environment. This moment with Pomni shows us that he can be a support to others, but it also gives us some insight into how much his condition is affecting him. Kinger doesn't get to have a moment like this with every character in the circus, but given how he handles both Pomni and Ragatha, we as an audience can tell that he'd probably be similarly comforting to just about everyone in the circus. And that's kind of what his function is within the series. For reasons that he can't control, he can't always act in the way that he wants to, but when he's really needed, he ends up being exactly what people need to hear. And this is kind of why it's important that his memory issues aren't a personal failing or something that he can shake off by himself. Throughout the series, a lot of characters will keep secrets for one reason or another. Not necessarily earth-shattering secrets, but how they feel about things and how they feel about themselves. This is normal for characters, but in an environment like the amazing digital circus, where things are already so random and unpredictable, having someone not be entirely honest with you can breed a lot of distrust, regardless of whatever reasoning they might have for doing so. Kinger is extra trustworthy in this environment because all the secrets he's keeping are unintentional. It's understood by the audience and later the cast that if he could have told them everything, he would have. The writing and his condition absolves him of the responsibility of the secrets he's carrying, and that allows him to be the supportive figure that many of the members need. Because he's not actively choosing to keep them in the dark like someone like Kane is. Kinger as a character doesn't really need to learn anything. He still has some personal angst about his wife dying, and some guilt maybe for not being able to be there for his creation, but he's basically exactly where he needs to be emotionally to be the perfect emotional support that so many in the circus are lacking. And that's why the series can't allow him to be aware most of the time. In order for the show to have any sort of drama or pacing, we can't really allow him to be there for every character, even though he would definitely want to be. In order for the right things to happen, he needs to be out of the way sometimes, and his memory issues function as a way of facilitating that. And speaking of which, let's take a moment to talk about Kinger's other role within the show. Kinger is able to serve as a very important emotional linchpin throughout the series, but he's also the center of its mysteries, because he clearly knows a lot that he's not able to talk about. As early as the pilot, he's established to just know things that the others don't, which essentially makes him one big Chekhov's gun waiting to go off. And he's pretty much the only way that the cast is going to get answers, because the only other person in the series with that information is Kane, and he was not in a sharing mood for most of the time that the cast knew him. As well as being a friend and surrogate parent to some of the other characters, Kinger is also the wise old sage who knows more than they let on. And this dual role leads to some weird writing tension throughout the series. Because Kinger serves as an emotional support that kickstarts character development for many of these people, and because he knows the actual background of the world they're stuck in and the answers to many of the mysteries that the audience is curious about, if you think about it, he could, theoretically, solve every single problem in the story if he was just allowed to be aware most of the time. There's a bit of a joke in the fandom that if Jax had just had a conversation with Kinger at some point, then things would have turned out very differently. And there's honestly some truth to it. I know there are some people who think that Jax would never have changed regardless of who was reaching out, but Kinger's 2 for 2 at this point. I think he could have had a decent shot. And if he'd been able to talk to Pomni in this moment, who even knows how this episode would have gone? The story, whether intentionally or by accident, has made Kinger into the answer to every single issue that the characters could have. And as a result, the story has to be very careful in its writing to make sure that it never implies that the characters should be taking Kinger into the pillow fort and keeping him there until they get every single answer they can out of him. You've created an avenue by which the other characters can get all of the answers that they want, and you now need to either make the audience forget that that's a possibility, or convince them that this is something the other characters wouldn't think to do. Now, it's important to note that this is not a problem that is specific to Kinger. Mentor characters often know a lot more than the other people in the story, and are keeping things secret for their own reasons. And a catalyst for the main character is often this mentor character dying before they can reveal everything, leading into the greater narrative where everyone goes on a journey to figure things out. In Kinger's case, he's not intentionally keeping what he knows a secret. There are factors beyond his control, and this is very good for character moments and good at showing that he's trustworthy because his forgetfulness is unintentional and beyond his control. So you can tell that his earnestness and honesty are genuine. However, he is still present throughout the entirety of the story, with an established way that the characters can just talk to him and get answers to their questions. And as I said, this creates some unique writing challenges. For the most part, I think The Amazing Digital Circus pulls off the idea that people wouldn't think to question Kinger too much, but there are definitely cracks that start to appear if you look too closely, especially as the series draws to a close. At the start of the series, most of the characters don't think about Kinger very much, because they've come to the conclusion that he's crazy and can't be relied upon to make sound decisions. Which is true a lot of the time from their point of view. It makes sense at a glance why they wouldn't think that there's much more to this guy. But when you look a little closer, it's kind of weird that they don't know that there's more going on. They've been here for literal years, and they're doing an adventure every single day. Even if they don't immediately understand that darkness makes him more sane, surely they would have realized at some point that he has some better days and does better in certain environments. It's especially weird that Ragatha doesn't know this, considering she had no one to talk to but Kinger for like a year. The darkness thing is kept a little vague on how it works with his memory, and this allows the writing to be flexible with how it uses it, and that's not a problem in and of itself. But it also provides a coincidental excuse for why none of the other characters have stumbled upon this knowledge before, which can be a little frustrating with how hand-wavy it is. Pomni in particular becomes somewhat egregious for not looking more into things when it comes to Kinger, because there's really no reason that she wouldn't have talked to someone about what she discovered. Up until episode 5, it's kind of implied that she thought they already knew, but after episode 5, it's clear that they don't. So what exactly is stopping her? Yes, they go on an adventure every day, but those don't seem to last that long. So what are they doing the rest of the time? This is something we don't get a lot of detail on, but it's kind of implied that they're just hanging out, talking about things. It's a little confusing why she never really tried to talk to Kinger again, especially since they had such a great connection the first time. Honestly, overall, this doesn't come out to be a huge issue, because the series is very careful to never imply that Pomni should have realized something sooner, but it does become a little odd when you think about it. If Pomni had just randomly decided to hang out in Kinger's pillow fort one day, then this whole series might have gone really differently. The narrative seems to solve the problem of Pomni not digging more into the Kinger mystery by just not acknowledging it very much. Pomni says that she trusts Kinger the most, but by the time of that episode, they've only really had one meaningful conversation, which is kind of weird when you actually stop to think about it. And honestly, I think it's kind of admirable that the series is able to get you to understand and agree with Pomni's trust of Kinger, even though they technically don't interact that much one-on-one. Kinger technically only has a couple of quote-unquote sane interactions, but they're so impactful and meaningful that they carry the character for the rest of the time. We as the audience know that Kinger is trustworthy even with how limited his sanity seems to be. I'm complaining about the other characters not really trying to interact with him much because it kind of bothers me personally, but from a writing perspective, it honestly doesn't stick out that much. Except for a moment in the finale that I think is really, really weird. Jax abstracts in the final episode, and it is very, very strange that we see the reaction of every single character except Kinger. It's not that his reaction is vague or hard to parse, it's that he's not even in the scene at all. And this is the moment that I have a really big problem with, because his absence feels like a really big hole that the episode just decides not to address. There's not even a throwaway line from somewhere else about him being in a different location or that he went off because he was upset. He's just gone, and no one acknowledges the absence. Yes, I am aware that within universe, the characters themselves probably wouldn't have the wherewithal to worry about Kinger while they're having this very traumatic experience, but I'm talking about the writing here. And from a writing perspective, him going unacknowledged in what is an extremely important and pivotal moment of the series feels deliberate, and not necessarily in a good way. Because I think I know why Kinger is not in this scene, and I don't think that it's a very good reason. Or at the very least, I think it could have been handled a lot better. Kinger has thus far been a very important part of the finale. He drops the bombshell that they're all actually brain scans and not actual people, but even though he's upset at first, he's able to recover and start repairing things. And Pomni is able to use that stability and support to pull herself up again, leading to most of the other characters recovering and coming together again. And yet, in this pivotal moment, he is completely absent and unacknowledged. And I think it's because we needed to have this moment between Ragatha and Pomni, and it would not have happened if Kinger was there. I'm going to go into more detail about this moment in my Ragatha and Pomni videos, but I think it's clear that this is a very important moment for both of them. They're both opening up and talking about their issues in a way that they haven't let themselves, and it needs to be between the two of them. It's important that they are talking to each other about their feelings in this moment, both about the abstraction of Jax and about each other. And that's why Kinger can't be there. Kinger at this point has been established as not only a wise figure who gives great emotional support, but he has specifically been established as great at giving emotional support to Ragatha and Pomni. He is said in the literal text of the show to be the character that both of them trust the most out of anyone there.
Is it weird to say I trust him the most out of everybody?
No, that's not weird at all.
He has served as a pseudo-parental figure for both of them. The two sane moments he gets that are so impactful in characterizing him are with these two. So it stands to reason that if he was allowed to be present, they would probably be talking to him about this instead of each other. The writing has established that Kinger is a mature, kind, benevolent conveyor of important information who can solve pretty much any problem in the story if he's allowed to be present for it. So in order for this moment to happen, Kinger isn't present for it. His absence is very distracting, but in order for the story to progress in the intended way, they need him to not be around because it would be extremely hard to justify why these characters aren't turning to him in this moment of crisis, especially with how much he's helped them previously. The series has technically had moments like this, where Kinger could have solved things if he was there and sane, but he's not, and so here we are. And that doesn't really damage the series too much. But this moment specifically really stands out to me in not a very good way. This moment doesn't completely break the finale either, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that weren't bothered by Kinger's absence. But as soon as you start thinking about it, it just feels wrong. And it really showcases the razor's edge balancing act that the show has to do with Kinger as a character. And you really start to feel that edge if you're paying attention. It just feels a little contrived that he's not present for this, and it really bothers me, especially since we never get an explanation for it. When we look at the series as a whole, it's clear that Kinger is a very necessary and very good part of the story, because he pushes characters forward and gives them a steady presence to rely on. And he's also important structurally for pushing the series as a whole forward, with his knowledge of how the circus works and what's going on with Kane. The narrative positions Kinger as the one with answers, and as a result, it needs to be very careful about how it uses him. It's mostly able to keep things flowing in the way that it wants to, but it can start to feel a little contrived if you're looking at everything all at once. Essentially, they had to kind of nerf Kinger to make sure he didn't solve everything too quickly. As I said before, this isn't necessarily a problem unique to Kinger. The point of mentor characters is that they know way more than everyone else, and most stories just don't have them present for certain moments, and that's fine. But because of the world that this story takes place in, it just becomes a little bit more obvious when the narrative is intentionally leaving him behind for plot reasons. There's a reason that a lot of mentor characters die. At a certain point, the narrative wants the main characters to grow without that safety net. Amazing Digital Circus is able to get around this by making Kinger unable to be helpful most of the time, so the characters are on their own most of the time, except for specific plot-relevant moments, which makes it feel really obvious when he's absent for a specific plot-relevant moment. This is ultimately something that's going to come down to personal taste. If you didn't notice any weird writing stuff with Kinger, then that's completely fine, and probably what the series intended. But it is something that you notice upon further inspection, and if it bothers you, I don't think that's necessarily a problem either. It's just a little quirk that comes with writing a character like this, and it's ultimately up to you if you think the series managed to pull it off well. While writing this script, I found myself really fascinated by a theoretical version of the show where Kinger being absent so much is a character flaw rather than something he can't control. Kinger has some vague absentee father vibes that are mostly obvious with Kane, but he kinda gets away with this because, again, it's not his fault that he can't remember things. But what if it was his fault? I remember early on in the series that there was some worry that this craziness of Kinger's was an act. And what if that ended up being true? What if these moments where he's decidedly unhelpful weren't quirky little things beyond his control, but something that he had decided to do because he's avoiding the truth in some areas? This is a version of the character that is deeply complicated. Someone who is there for you in your darkest moments, but then completely absent the next, because he can be there for your emotional problems, but actually solving the root issues of your environment isn't a step he's willing to take. And in this universe, he's willing to support everyone but the one who needs support from him the most, Kane. There's something about that idea to me, something almost tangible, where I can almost see how different the show would have felt if all of this happened because Kinger didn't want to face his past. As I've talked about already in this video, I can see why they didn't go in this direction, because the fact that these absences are unintentional is really important in how the others view Kinger and how much they trust him, but this potential version feels so almost real to me. I can so easily see it being employed, and it would make Kinger one of the most complicated characters of the show, and it would also make him a whole lot harder to like. This direction would have given him an arc about actually owning up to his mistakes, instead of just trying to make up for them. I'm not saying that this potential theoretical version would have been better, because again, there's a lot of reasons that it wouldn't have worked in this version of the show. It makes him a whole lot more selfish and a whole lot less trustworthy, and we need that trust for certain plot elements to work. But I choose to bring it up anyway because it's a very fascinating possibility to me. The angle of Kinger as an absentee father kind of exists only on the fringes, because the narrative absolves him of the responsibility by essentially giving him conditional dementia. And looking into a world where he's not absolved and things still happen the same way because of his choices is very interesting for me to think about. As it stands, I think Kinger works well enough as a character. He doesn't really grow in a traditional sense, but instead he's given more autonomy as the narrative moves forward. And that works for the pacing of the series and how it wants to reveal things and have arcs play out. Kinger is very likable, and his contributions to the story are undeniable, and I think a lot of people just find him to be a breath of fresh air in a series where so many are actively suffering. Kinger's tragedy is a lot more quiet, with his sad past something that he's come to terms with, rather than something he's being actively tortured by. He doesn't come to mind as much when I'm thinking about my favorite characters because of that, but it's undeniable that he's extremely important to the narrative as a whole, and the show wouldn't be the same without him in it. The fact that he's allowed to live as a mentor character through everything is an indication of the tone that the series is trying to have. Because as much as this story takes inspiration from works that are scary and nihilistic, it is deeply kind and optimistic in its ending, in almost every aspect. Kinger is a comforting and kind and warm presence, and for a show that wants to emphasize the importance of community and caring for one another, him being allowed to live and get his own happy ending is something truly special and wonderful. And even if things can't be the way they were before, I hope he's enjoying the time that he has now with the people who care about him. And I'm very glad that we were all able to come along for that ride. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was made kind of quickly because, as I alluded to, me and my husband moved recently and I had to set up all my stuff again, but I think it ended up coming together pretty nicely. Please let me know what you think, and if you have any analysis of your own, I'd love to hear about it. I usually do an after-party livestream on Twitch after releasing a video, but again, because of moving, things are just kind of crazy, so instead I'm just gonna say that you should follow my Twitch page and check out the VODs channel. Hopefully I'll be able to start doing these again soon. And if you like what I'm doing and want to support me more directly, you're in luck because I have a Patreon, where you can get early access to videos, exclusive updates, and so much more. This is also where I'm going to be posting updates for some of the really big projects that I have going in the background, so watch out for that. And I'd like to take this moment to thank all of my current patrons, including, but not limited to, Perplexia Sphinx, Snick, Tree, Lurch18489, Sphinx, I May Be Dumb, Puppet Wraith, and Gibbous Rat. And thank you all once again for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see the rest of the videos I make in this series, and everything else that I've been working on. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!